like we've been telling the same story for 50 years. One of the things that I do is I use that mechanism to create an internal continuity into the books that I'm doing. So if I'm telling a longer story, it remains consistent to itself.
An island appears 100 miles off the coast of Krakoa. The sentient mutant homeland senses the intruder and races towards it. Scott Summers recruits his children, Cable and Prestige, to investigate this new threat. Can they beat the clock and keep Krakoa safe? That is the premise of Jonathan Hickman's second issue of X-Men, and I must say, it's terrific. It feels like a classic X-Men story. It has all the hallmarks of Claremont's heavy use of interpersonal relationships with a nice mystery and twist ending. Jonathan Hickman has almost single-handedly given Marvel Comics all the momentum they could ever want with his X-Men reboot. And if you don't believe me, make sure to watch my October comic sales analysis that will be available on Sunday or Monday. It's insane the type of numbers he's delivering C.B. Cebulski and the Legion of Doofuses. And for the life of them, they can't figure out why. But that's a video and a topic for another day. Jonathan Hickman's doing something many industry insiders thought impossible. Bringing back lapsed comic readers into comic shops with stellar storytelling that pays homage to X-Men's extraordinary comic legacy. Veteran X-Men artist Leinil Francis Yu is once again the illustrator for this issue, although that looks to be changing very soon. The X-Men release schedule has been compressed so much there are 3 or 4 different primary artists on the first 6 issues, which I do think will pose a problem in the future, but it's not an issue yet. Yu's visual stylings are fantastic when paired with technology and terrific set pieces. He struggles a bit with more intimate character-driven moments, and that plays itself out once again in X-Men number 2. But I highly recommend this comic book. It's a fantastic read and much more enjoyable than the first issue in my opinion. Before I get into the details of Jonathan Hickman's latest X-Men comic, I ask if you haven't subscribed to Thinking Critical yet, please show your support and subscribe to the channel. Let your fellow comic readers know Thinking Critical is a valuable source for comic book reviews, news, discussion, and in-depth analysis. If you're enjoying the channel content, please subscribe. Now, let's get into the details in today's comic book review. The comic opens in the summer house with Scott giving Cable and Prestige the rundown of the latest issue with Krakoa. The sentient island is making a beeline for a second island that appeared miles off the coastline. Much like the first issue, Leinil Francis Yu struggles giving the X-Men much character or life with facial expressions or body language. Anytime there's an interesting conversation or other stimuli, it's not evident what the characters are thinking or feeling from the art, which is somewhat detrimental to Hickman's X-Men. Sure, the series features action, but Hickman's giving far more attention to character moments and interactions, and it just isn't Yu's strong suit. If he were illustrating an X-Men series about the Forge, or even what X-Men character Forge is doing beneath Krakoa, his visuals would stand out as a huge value add. But right now, they're not really adding much to what Hickman's trying to build, at least in my opinion. The art isn't bad by any means, but it feels like they tabbed the wrong artist for this particular series. While the majority of the story is Scott and his children bonding while investigating this new island, Yu is given an opportunity to really elevate Hickman's work with some standout creature and set designs on the island. He's really in his element when he's making something new or inventive, like this approach to what we'll learn is Arachmal, and yes, it's related to Rocco. This is, without a doubt, my favorite illustration in X-Men number 2. I also need to mention Leinil Francis Yu's exceptional paneling in this comic. You won't find an easier story to follow. His layouts lead your eyes along perfectly. This is the kind of comic you want to give new readers. Visually, the story flows seamlessly from the first page to the last. Despite my criticism of Yu's work with character expressions, this is a well-illustrated comic overall. I rate the art 3.5 out of 5. Writer Jonathan Hickman is very effective at accomplishing 3 things in X-Men number 2. One of the themes I'm seeing throughout the Dawn of X titles is the effects Krakoa is having on the inhabitants. Some are physically changing as they bond with the sentient island, like Mondo and Black Tom Cassidy. Some are dropping their old names and in essence dropping their old identities. as Krakoa has given them a new perspective or newfound sense of pride. Apocalypse is now going by Krakoa and A, Betsy Braddock is leaving Psylocke behind, and Kitty now wants to be known as Kate. In X-Men #1, Cyclops talked about how Krakoa is changing his outlook on life, how he feels safe for himself and his family for the first time. And this week, Hickman stops telling and starts showing. Cyclops no longer has the weight of the mutant nation on his shoulders. He's trying to be a better father. He's going the extra mile to get to know Cable and Prestige better. And I love it. It shows tremendous character growth and change. We've never seen Scott really interact with his children like this. It's exceptionally effective character work on Hickman's part. The second thing he's doing is expanding and fleshing out the mythos and lore of Krakoa. Like I mentioned earlier, this second island is related to Krakoa's brother or sister island that was sent into the abyss and sealed off by Apocalypse. I'm going to talk about this in some detail at the end of the review, but I can't give it all away. The reveals in this comic are far too good for someone to learn in a spoiler. Everyone needs to experience the last 4 pages of X-Men #2 for themselves. It's master storycraft on Hickman's part. And the final thing he's accomplishing happens on these 2 pages. He's connecting the narrative in X-Men #2 to the other Dawn of X titles. In the Other Island White page, Charles Xavier's assassination in X-Force #1 is referenced. Also in this conversation between Scott and his children, we learn Scott is the one who let Cypher and the New Mutants use his portal to the Starjammer's ship. They have to investigate this new island because Cypher is gone, Charles is dead, and there's nobody to communicate with Krakoa at the moment. Excellent work tying all these stories together. I love this comic. This is a good example of Scott interacting and bonding with his children. As they check through the new setting, Scott mentions how it reminds him of some of the smaller islands on Hawaii. He asks Prestige if she's ever been. She mentions she visited once, but it was an end-of-the-world life or death scenario. Scott says, "That's no way to experience paradise, Rachel. You'll have to give it another shot. You know what? Why don't I take you?" It's really effective characterization on Hickman's behalf. I also like that it highlights what an odd family the Summers are. They're investigating an unknown, possibly hostile island, but it's pretty mundane behavior to them. They've all experienced so much combat at this point, this wouldn't seem like an issue to them. Whereas you or I would probably be too scared to talk. It's little moments like this that really add to the flavor of the comic and the Summers family. Hickman also gives us a great introduction to the Summoner. He basically communicates with a portal that gives him instructions. The white page is really helpful in this instance. A Summoner of Arakko can bridge the chasm between Arakko and Otherworld. We also learn times are very stark on Arakko. Years of war have dwindled the number of summoners available. This particular one is the last remaining high summoner, when there are normally 3. There are 2 other classes of summoners whose numbers are also extremely low. The portal, which he calls Mother, sends him off to track the Summers family. If there's one thing I don't think Hickman pulls off well in this particular comic, it's the humor. Or more specifically, the humor related to young Cable. There are a few comedic lines Scott delivers, and I personally found them basically pitch perfect, but something about the voice and personality he gives Cable just doesn't sit right with me. It's not cringe, but it's not funny either. In this scene, the Summers clan meet the Summoner for the first time. As you might expect, there's a bit of a communication barrier. Cable decides to give him a gift because, as he says, "I'm a good person, I do good things, and that's why people love me." He gives the Summoner a thermal grenade, which turns out as bad as you would expect, but we do learn the Summoner is impervious to fire and can summon all the beasts on the island to his side. Scott reminds Prestige she's uploaded the Krakoan language into the inhabitants of Krakoa. She communicates with the Summoner telepathically, and it turns out he's very fluent in Krakoan. There's another Cable joke that falls flat here. After the Summoner asks why he tried to kill him, he says, "Can we just agree that I made some poor choices today and just move on?" If you like the Cable humor, that's great, but it's just not my thing. And I honestly don't need to like everything, so it's fine. But the fleshing out of Krakoa does move into high gear from here on out. Scott asks the Summoner why Krakoa and Arak Ma are heading towards each other. The Summoner asks, "Do you love someone?" I do like Scott's response here. Complicated question, but for the sake of expediency, let's just say yes. I love a single someone. And we learned that Krakoa wants to be with Arakmal the same way that Scott wants to be with Jean and half the other female mutants on Krakoa. I'm pretty sure the islands bond in an adult manner here. It was kind of funny, I guess. And just like that, Krakoa and Arakmal become one, as they should be, as they always were. The Summoner leaves Scott and his family behind because, as he says, I'm not going anywhere because now I live here, and I live here because he lives here. The he the Summoner is referring to is the mutant formerly known as Apocalypse. I will give Hickman this. He's making me look at Apocalypse in a whole new light. It's really interesting some of the choices he's making. I kind of feel like Charles is the bad guy in this story, and Krakoa and A is the good guy. I'm surprised he's making Apocalypse feel like such a sympathetic character at this point. I don't want to give too much away. House of X and Powers of 10 readers can probably figure out basically who this is. But I will say this. Arakko is in trouble and will soon fall. The Summoner came here to find Apocalypse and ask if he will help save Arakko. When the history of Okara was introduced during Hox and Pox, it was easily one of the most exciting plot threads in my opinion. I'm equal parts ecstatic and shocked Hickman's revisiting it so soon. I thought this would come into play much further down the road in the story. Needless to say, X-Men number 3 can't get here fast enough. Although it's mentioned summoners can bridge to Otherworld, so this may play out in Excalibur. One of the few Dawn of X titles I'm not really interested in. Adding the Arakko story arc to that series would definitely keep me reading Excalibur for a while. This is the best X-Men comic Jonathan Hickman's written since House of X number 4 in my opinion. The only thing about this comic I don't think was effective was the Cable humor, and I can totally see that hitting with other readers. There's a tremendous amount of character and story development for Scott and Krakoa in this comic. I rate the characterization 4.5 out of 5. This is a great X-Men story that feels straight out of Claremont's run. It ties in very well to the other Dawn of X titles and might be propelling Excalibur forward as well. I rate the plot 5 out of 5. Before I wrap this up, I want to send a friendly reminder, if you can't get enough of Jonathan Hickman's Dawn of X X-Men reboot, tune in to tomorrow's edition of Outside the Bleed on Thinking Critical with my good friend Skip and Tosh. We're reviewing Brian Hill's Fallen Angels number 1, the final Dawn of X debut. We're going to theorize what it all means and where we believe the story is heading. We leave the margins of the comic book and explore all the implications Fallen Angels number 1 has on Dawn of X as well as the Marvel Comics universe. X-Men number 2 has a few small issues, but is very close to being a 5-star comic in my book. Artist Leinil Francis Yu isn't the strongest artist when it comes to intimate character interactions, which is basically the backbone of this comic. He does bring the goods with creature and set designs. Jonathan Hickman delivers an exceptionally strong script this issue. I love that he backed up Cyclops' words from X-Men number 1 with action in this comic. He adds a ton of weight and importance to Krakoa's history and what it means to the future of the series. Just fantastic job all around on Hickman's part. I rate X-Men number 2 4.5 out of 5. This comic receives my highest recommendation. This story could easily sit in Claremont's historic 17-year run on Uncanny X-Men and not feel out of place in my opinion. This is a great comic despite some very minor flaws. The first wave of Dawn of X comics had their ups and downs. In my opinion, X-Force number 1 is still the best of the bunch, but X-Men number 2 is right on its heels. It feels like this issue might even be elevating my interest in Excalibur moving forward, which is great. I have a feeling Teenie Howard is going to need all the help she can get. If you're interested in hearing more in-depth analysis of the first wave of Dawn of X titles, there will be a special edition of the Animanium Hour this Sunday, live on the channel. Doc, Chase, Skip, and a couple other friends will join me, and we're going to talk about all the number 1 issues collectively for about 2 hours or so, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have any questions for the panel, leave them in the comments section, or you can @ me or one of the other panel guests on Twitter. Thank you so much, and I hope you join me for tomorrow's OTB and probably a very salty Event Leviathan review.